No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Eleanor Roosevelt. Welcome to the Citizens of the Globe podcast, where we not only embrace, but encourage change in our environment, in our bodies, in our minds, and in our souls. My name is Michael Maltese, and I aim to break down the borders we create in our minds, one meaningful conversation at a time. Hello, everybody. Welcome back, or if this is your first time listening in, it's nice to meet you. Last week, we talked about what codependency can look like, but it was just one perspective of these manifestations of behavior. Like I said, codependency isn't a mental illness and there's no diagnostic criteria. So it looks different on different people. Codependency is merely an attempt to provide relief for those searching for some answers to why they may behave the way they do. And if the description helps you or someone you know, then apply it. If it doesn't, well, I urge you to keep exploring your inner being for what it is you need. All the answers you seek, I truly do believe, are already within you. So this week, I'd like to pick up where we left off. Boundaries. And most of the content from this episode is sourced from 3 books. Stop Walking on Eggshells by Paul T. Mason and Randy Kreger, Emotional Blackmail by Danya Frazier, and lastly, Prodependence by Robert Weiss. Now, I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but some of us really do need to hear this. Setting healthy boundaries is one of the most essential tenets in life. Without them, we're susceptible to being used, abused, and taken advantage of. But only you have the power to identify and set your boundaries. Never assume that people already know them. Even if you think it's an obvious thing, make it abundantly clear between all parties what your boundaries are. So there's no way a person can manipulate you, gaslight you, or twist the truth. One thing that was a really big struggle for me was understanding that even being silent in the face of trespasses against me was not taking the higher road or being an adult. I'd often let people belittle me or make fun of me without a shred of retaliation. No comebacks, no pettiness, nothing. In my head, I would tell myself that I won't stoop to their level. Honestly, I thought it was the best solution. Well, in her book, Emotional Blackmail, Donna Frazier maintains a different stance. She says something so profound that really helped me when I needed to hear this. I hope it helps you too. She says, every day we teach people how to treat us by showing them what we will and will not accept, what we refuse to confront, and what we let slide. We may believe that we can make another person's troublesome behavior disappear if we don't make a fuss. But the message we send is it worked. Do it again. So I learned that even avoiding something is an action taken. And if I use it too often, it's the worst kind of reaction or action. However difficult it may sound, you must stand up for yourself and let it be known what you will and will not tolerate. But I also caution you to refrain from destructive back and forth jabs with the other party. Just simply state your boundaries. The rest is on them. They can either respect your boundaries or suffer consequences. And this is true of all relationships. I do recognize, though, that this can be a very tough decision depending on the extent of the relationship. But your boundaries don't change for anyone. Not your father, not your mother, not your partner, not your boss. The only person allowed to flex your boundaries is you. And this is where the other side of boundaries comes into play. When someone breaks my boundaries, a question pops into my head. Should I be unshakable in my boundaries? Or should I let it slide and be flexible? This is tough, but in Stop Walking on Eggshells, the general consensus was that you had to know your limits, state them, also identify consequences for when those limits are breached, but have the wisdom to know when to be flexible in the face of those breaches. So, taking some time beforehand to think through consequences for different boundary breaks will really help you when someone inevitably does break your boundaries. Because it can be a very difficult thing to figure out what to do next in that situation. As someone who is struggling with identifying consequences themselves, I know how hard it can be, and it really depends on the type of relationship in question. Sometimes consequences just have to be discussed on the spot. But it is also fair to just ask the other person to acknowledge that they broke the boundary and come back to it later when you understand what exactly you want to do next. Try to be assertive, not aggressive. Each situation is unique and requires a nuanced resolution, but I'm confident in your abilities as a thinking human being to process the information coming in and make the decision that best suits you at the time. Remember, though, there are people who dedicate their whole life to helping you in this regard. Whether that help comes from a book, or that help comes from therapy, or that help comes from a podcast, the help is out there. I want you to know that I truly do try to see things as objectively as I can. And it's been brought to my attention that there are some flaws in the model of codependence. It can sound very clinical and unemotional. For instance, in therapy for loved ones of addicts, there's an emphasis on their behavior and their part in this dynamic. The therapist will ask them, well, what happened in your past? Oh, you had an alcoholic father? A substance abusing mother? And now you're just reimagining that cycle and playing it out in your adult life. Do you see how insecurely you're attached to this person? You've lost your sense of self. It can be a bit of a shock. And while I hope no therapist actually puts it that way, even if they're nuanced about it, the loved one might feel that way. Because when you hear that, as someone who's codependent myself, I hear, oh, I'm the problem. Okay, well, I just need to fix me. All the responsibility gets put on you. And I don't ever want you to contort yourself into a box that makes you feel like the problem. In his book, Prodependence, Robert Weiss acknowledges a need for codependent people to be noticed for their efforts, their sacrifices to be validated, and their need for empathy. He says that they don't need to be presented with another problem to fix. And so he controversially critiques codependency altogether. And personally, I think he does it fantastically. In the first chapter of his book, he does a great comparison between family members with someone who has cancer or is physically disabled, and family members who act in the exact same way towards someone with an addiction problem or a mental illness. He says that family members who drop everything and take up 2 jobs for someone who has cancer are looked at as saints and making the ultimate sacrifice for someone to have a fulfilling life despite their situation. While you apply the same dynamic to someone with an addiction, they're called enablers, codependent, and unwilling to change. Blinded by love. Well, I don't want to butcher his theory. I hope one day to have him on the podcast so he can elaborate on prodependence, because it really is a valid critique on the model of codependency. And while I fit the codependent model, I still agree with him. In the beginning of my journey, I turned all the anger inwards. As soon as I found myself ticking the boxes of a codependent person, I was like, wow, look at all the things I've been doing wrong. I can't believe myself. I need to fix this. I'm the problem. I understand now. But that's where therapy really, really helped, and I am so grateful to have a therapist who was empathetic, who did let me get my anger out, my frustration, and just spent multiple sessions just listening. But I do understand that not all therapists are created equal. And I'm sorry if you haven't had a quality mental health professional or quality mental health care in the past. I do urge you to keep seeking that, though, because at least now you know exactly what you do not want. Take that information and find what you do want in terms of mental health care. All right, so here we are in the final minutes of this conversation today. We talked about why boundaries are important, what setting boundaries should look like, and proposed an alternate take on codependency. I appreciate you for taking time to grow on this beautiful day. If you feel compelled to, rating and reviewing or giving this podcast a like and subscribe on YouTube really does go a long way in helping it reach more ears. But remember, just as setting your boundaries is your choice, so is this. To end things today, I want to quickly read off some promises that are a core element of Codependence Anonymous meetings. Let whatever resonates with you be explored. I know a new sense of belonging, the feeling of emptiness and loneliness will disappear. I am no longer controlled by my fears. I overcome my fears and act with courage, integrity, and dignity. I know a new freedom. I release myself from worry, guilt, and regret about my past and present. I am aware enough not to repeat it. I know a new love and acceptance of myself and others. I feel genuinely lovable, loving, and loved. I learn to see myself as equal to others. My new and renewed relationships are all with equal partners. I am capable of developing and maintaining healthy and loving relationships. The need to control and manipulate others will disappear as I learn to trust those who are trustworthy. I learn that it is possible to mend, to become more loving, intimate, and supportive. I have the choice of communicating with my family in a way which is safe for me and respectful of them. I acknowledge that I am a unique and precious creation. I no longer need to rely solely on others to provide my sense of worth. I trust the guidance that I receive from my higher power and come to believe in my own capabilities. I gradually experience serenity, strength, and spiritual growth in my daily life. And with that, I hope you are having the kind of day that you want to have.